After 5 long years and another year's delay, Halo Infinite is finally here. I've completed the main campaign, and after some processing and retrospect, I've got a lot to say about it. It's not all bad, but it's not all good either. I'm gonna say some things that some people are gonna disagree with, but hey, that's how opinions work. Oh, and of course, major spoilers to follow. Don't watch this unless you've beaten the main story. You have been warned. I won't be talking about multiplayer here because that's a whole other discussion. I'll be focusing specifically on the campaign. Most of what I have to say is about the story, so I'm going to cover that last. Also, I'm going to attempt to focus on what the game is and has instead of what it could have been and could have had, because again, those are two totally different discussions. First thing we're going to talk about is the gameplay itself. It's solid. Easily my favorite aspect of Infinite. I played through on normal and still found some moments of challenge, which is good. Unlike in multiplayer, all the guns feel really satisfying to use. My go-to combo is the Commando and Bulldog. In fact, I pretty much always had a Bulldog in my back pocket. I wish I liked it that much in multiplayer. Mangler's Bay, Arcane Sentinel Beam is daddy. I didn't use the Gravity Hammer as much as I would have liked since the Bulldog is so much better generally, but the wind-up and slam is stupidly fun. This is easily my favorite iteration of the Gravity Hammer. The Grapple Shot continues to be the best new addition to Halo. Holy fucking shit is this thing fun and useful. So many applications. Traversing the ring would be so much more dull and frustrating without it, and that's not even touching the applications in combat. Using it to grab fusion coils and chuck them, or lock onto a grunt and smack him, or pull over a new weapon, or hijack a vehicle, or swing past a boss who's about to flatten me. And then you have the upgrades that make it shock people and turn it into a ground pound from Halo 5. Fuck yes, good stuff. I wish I could say the same about the vehicles. Except for the Wasp and the Ghost, they feel off. The Warthogs and Mongooses are too bouncy and light and flip on everything. The Chopper gets stuck weirdly easily and also flips on everything. The Scorpion is a fucking bitch to turn, and the Banshee feels strangely floaty and slippery, and its guns do like no damage. I haven't really gotten to drive a Wraith, so I can't comment on it. The handling problem is only exacerbated by the fact that all the vehicles are made out of wet tissue paper. They get torn apart way too quickly, and it's ruined some moments for me. The biggest example of this being the road segment, which is clearly supposed to be the game's Warthog run. I got in the available Rocket Hog, the Halo theme started up, and I got hyped as hell, only for a stray plasma grenade to blow the wheel off of my Hog in the first 3 minutes, which was quickly followed by death. So I respawned and got in the Scorpion tank instead, which was almost immediately destroyed by a single rocket. Really cut down my hype. I ended up doing the gauntlet almost entirely on foot because it was more efficient. Enemy vehicles are also really easy to deal with even when you don't have heavy weapons because you have the grapple shot, although I noticed boarding wraiths and planting grenades doesn't really do anything anymore. That might be a bug, I'm not sure. It's really too bad because the most open world Halo game really could have benefited from good vehicle gameplay, but it just doesn't. The best thing you can do with vehicles is load up a Razorback with Marines carrying power weapons and go around wrecking face, but even this can be cut short of being truly fun due to the Razorback's relative fragility. Enemy vehicles also lack satisfying destruction effects, particularly the Phantom, which is very noticeably bad and is a huge step down from Halo 3. The AI seems pretty competent. My Marines were actually useful for once, especially once I handed them power weapons, although they still managed to blow themselves up with rockets 2 or 3 times. The enemies don't seem stupid. Like I said, I found normal difficulty a challenge sometimes, and I died a few times when enemies took advantage of my mistakes. The Hunters especially gave me trouble. Holy shit did they give me trouble. Hunters in the earlier Halo games were pretty much just predictable jokes, but Halo 5 really stepped them up, and I'm glad to see Infinite continue that trend. Now they are extremely viable mini-bosses, and I felt anxious whenever I had to fight them, and each battle had close shaves and nail-biting dodges and forced me to get creative with the environment. As much as I hate dealing with them, they're probably my favorite enemies to encounter. The same cannot be said about the actual boss fights. I've never been happy with boss battles in shooter games. They're usually just damage sponges, and that's true for the majority of the bosses in Infinite. Halo's never really had strong boss battles before. The Heretic Leader, the Prophet of Regret, Tartarus, and Guilty Spark are all pretty much jokes. And the Warden Eternal was really well done, but they reused him like 20 fucking times. I found that the best boss battles in shooters are the ones that require you to shoot a specific spot on the boss, like with the Warden Eternal and with the Hunters, which is why they worked for me on a case-to-case basis. And of the main bosses in Infinite, only Adjutant Resolution featured this, so I'm glad he was the only boss that got recycled. I'm not saying that all the bosses weren't fun. Escherum's fight was enjoyable, if predictable, and Jaga's fight had a great atmosphere, though I accidentally cheesed him by dropping his shields down and backsmacking him before he could do anything, so that ended up being rather anticlimactic. The Harbinger's boss fight was also a huge letdown as the final boss fight of the game as well. It was basically just Sentinel Beam go burr, followed by a melee attack, and then repeat twice. I'm just not totally satisfied with the Infinite's execution of boss fights. While they're better than previous Halos, they're still mostly just damage sponges. Overall, Infinite's core gameplay is some of the best in all of Halo, although the vehicle gameplay is extremely flawed and most boss battles lack depth. Infinite's most standout feature compared to previous games is its semi-open world. I say semi-open because it's less Skyrim and more Halo 3 ODST enlarged by 200%. It both works and does not work. Let me explain. I love exploring game worlds. Zeta Halo was no exception. Every inch of the world we can explore is well crafted and gorgeous. I like discovering caves and grappling up cliffs and finding small details here and there. It's great to see varied forms of wildlife too, although I wonder what happened to the space rhinos and the space deer. The day-night cycle results in some stunning vistas. I was reasonably satisfied with what they managed to achieve with the sub-biomes as well. Areas like the swamp, ship graveyard, and excavation sites stand apart from each other. However, there can be no doubt that the overall game hurts from the lack of truly differing environments, both exterior and interior. There are only 3 real environments in Infinite: Pacific Northwest outside, standard Foreigner architecture inside, and the occasional Banished base. Compared to even games such as Combat Evolved, which, although also taking place on a Halo ring, sees us traverse a large amount of varied locales, this is a staggeringly low amount of environments for what is supposed to be the biggest Halo campaign yet. While I have no real problem with the environments themselves, they are all beautiful and well detailed, the lack of variety results in a missing sense of progression for Infinite, which leads to a feeling of nothing really being accomplished in the main story. For me, it also kinda made all the missions run together. None of them are really distinct from one another, because they all feel like they take place in the same location. Even ODST did this better. While all the missions took place in New Mombasa, each flashback mission felt distinct from one another. Infinite would have done well to more greatly diversify its environments. Now, the characters filling these environments are another story. There's never been another Halo where the AI is so fun and full of life. Marines and Banished alike have some of the best dialogue yet. They even trash talk each other in combat. Grunts especially have some very notable quotes. There's also the hilarious propaganda towers, which are always fun to listen to right before you blow them up. It's a nice touch that the messages from the propaganda towers change as you progress through the game, with updates for how many forward operating bases you've taken, for what bosses you've killed. They change based on the end of the game after you kill Escherum. And there's a fuckload of awesome little Easter eggs, like where they ask you if you beat the game on Legendary. I love that. The open world aspect also hurts a classic campaign aspect: set pieces. There's no grand events, no scarab battles, no massive vehicle battles since Marines can't drive, which is no doubt a change due to the open world aspect. Nothing memorable like the Forward Unto Dawn landing, or the Saber section in Reach, or New Alexandria, or the Broadsword trench run, or the Mammoth. Hell, even the Kraken in Halo 5 was more memorable than anything we get in Infinite. Part of the fun of Halo is these big, grandiose encounters that stick with you, and Infinite just doesn't have any because they made it open world. I was worried about Infinite's open world being barren with little to do. Luckily that isn't the case, but sadly while the world is full of objectives, the objectives are pretty repetitive and sometimes pretty dull. Aside from main story missions, the open world objectives consist of destroying Banished outposts, taking fobs, killing bosses, rescuing Marines, and finding collectibles. You repeat each of these objectives a dozen times or more if you intend to reach full completion, except for the most exciting objective of destroying Banished outposts, which there are sadly only 7 of. The strongest advantage of the open world aspect is being able to approach these objectives in whatever way you want, utilizing the fullness of Infinite Sandbox. Do I want to attack the Spanish base with a Scorpion tank, or with a Razorback full of skewer-wielding Marines? Should I approach this fob from the high ground with a sniper, or rush straight in with a Bulldog? It's at this point when any Halo is at its strongest, and Infinite makes good use of this. But Like the environments, it eventually just becomes old and repetitive. And even worse, none of the secondary objectives fucking matter. It doesn't matter if you rescue every single goddamn Marine on Zeta Halo, the story still treats it like Chief and Brohammer are alone. You could blow up every base the Banished have set up and kill every last boss, and the only Banished that react to it are the propaganda towers. Escharum doesn't even make a nod towards that. And the collectibles? Unlike ODST's excellent audio log story, none of the logs in Infinite are fairly memorable or interesting. And the armor lockers don't even contain unlockable armor, just pointless shit like weapon charms and emblems and god-awful boring coatings. The best you can hope for is 1 or 2 good armor coatings and stances. The best collectibles are the Spartan cores, which you can use to upgrade your abilities, which is definitely a good in-game progression system, but with the amount of cores scattered across the map, I feel like each ability could have used 1 or 2 more progression levels. There's way more cores out there than you actually need, which makes me wonder if maybe there are other abilities that were supposed to be upgraded that were cut? I don't know. There's skulls out there too, which is good. I'm sure skull hunters had fun finding them. The Easter eggs are pretty good as well. It's just too bad there's no real incentive to complete the secondary objectives. You could skip them all and not feel a thing. Maybe they did that so players wanting a more traditional Halo experience could just do the story missions without any repercussions? But if that's the case, the compromise only weakens the open world premise, and to me, that's what the open world comes down to. One big compromise. And as the biggest marketed feature of Infinite, having the biggest Halo campaign yet, it really needed to be more than a compromise. As it stands, the open world aspect is an interesting concept, but honestly, I feel it does more harm than good here, and it is not a worthy replacement to the traditional campaign experience. I've listened to Infinite's soundtrack a few times over now, and unfortunately I have mixed feelings about it. And I have never said that for a Halo soundtrack before. Ever. The soundtrack is at its best during ambient pieces. They nailed the music for walking through ancient Forerunner halls, Crimson banished outposts, or across the highlands of Zeta Halo. It's really, really good stuff. It's easily the best bits of the soundtrack, and it is masterful work. Some of the more emotional pieces are good as well. And I really like listening to these, but none of it reaches the heights of the emotional music from Halo 2 or 3 or Reach or 4. There are some nice throwbacks to older Halo soundtracks that I enjoyed hearing as well. My biggest complaints are with the action-oriented tracks. Very few of them get my blood pumping and my creative juices flowing. A lot of them sound very samey, and if not for the track titles, I wouldn't be able to tell you where they played in-game because they don't stand out from one another. In fact, I still don't recall ever hearing Undercover or Through the Trees in game at any point. The only action music that really stood out to me while I was playing the game is Adjutant Resolution's boss battle theme. And listening to that by itself, it's a little bit of a letdown because it never like crescendos or gets really interesting beyond the synth lines. Oh, also the Road track, which is the new rendition of the Halo theme, it's good, but it kind of just ends like it's not complete. Compare that to Halo 3's rendition of the Halo theme, where, you know, it's a remake, but it's fully fleshed out instead of just ending. I don't know why they did this. Why bother remaking the Halo theme if you're not going to complete the track? It's good, but it just falls short because of that. There aren't any massively impacting tracks like Halo 4's Arrival or 117 either. None of them really stick with me. I also noticed a strange lack of leitmotifs, something Halo's never lacked before. The only ones I picked up on were Escherum's, and of course the standard Halo theme. I found myself missing Kazuma Janucci's 117 theme from Halo 4 and 5. I'm really sad there were no throwbacks to the Reclaimer era music at all. I also found it odd there were not more callbacks to older tracks in specific areas. I thought there was plenty of opportunity to bring back Cortana's theme from Halo 3, given how much the story revolves around Cortana. And I think there's some tracks missing too. I don't recall finding the tracks used in the opening of the game, such as when Brohammer finds Chief, or the new version of Opening Suite. Maybe I missed them, but I don't think they're there. I'll have to rely on people data mining them and uploading them to YouTube. All in all, Infinite's soundtrack was pretty good, but it could have been better. Now for the story, and here's where shit gets serious for me. As a writer, Halo's story is the single most important aspect to me, and Infinite needed to make a massive improvement on storytelling compared to Halo 5. It improved, but not nearly enough. We'll begin with the good first, and don't worry, there's plenty of good to go around. Let's start with some characters. As painful as it was to not even glimpse major players from Halo 5, such as Blue Team, Osiris, Lasky, hell, even Palmer, I think the story was actually stronger for having only a primary trio of characters to follow. I'm talking, of course, about Brohammer, the Weapon, and the Master Chief. I'll start with the Chief. One of my biggest hopes for Infinite was that they'd continue portraying him as they did in Halo 4, with him dealing with his more human side and having more vulnerable moments. And they did! Maybe not quite to the extent that they did with Halo 4, but still, this is good progress. Chief has some excellent moments during the main story, particularly when he had Brohammer and the Weapon to bounce off of, but also when he showed sorrow for the dead Spartans and respect for Escherum, even if those particular scenes are a little off. More on that later. We get to see more of his vulnerable side too, like when he talked about getting beaten by Atriox, or when the Weapon asks him if he's okay being at the place of Cortana's death. I think they created a masterful blend of the depthful Halo 4 Chief and the stoic, badass, one-liner spouting Chief from the original trilogy. He gets plenty of awesome new one-liners too.
His reputation is not good.
Neither is mine.
I hope we get more treatment of the Chief like this in the future. I'm happy with it. And now for my favorite new character, Fernando Esparza, Echo 216, Brohammer. I love this guy. To quote the weapon,
He's fun, I like him.
having an average Joe type character get pulled along on Chief's legendary escapades is something I never knew I wanted to see until now, and it works so well. He's the purely human element this game needed. The highlights of this campaign are centered around him. His introduction really makes you sympathize with him and puts you instantly on his side. The absolute highest point of the story is his breakdown around the middle of the game. This cutscene is golden, and we need more like it in Halo. This moment made me connect with the pilot.
I'm worthless.
I can't tell you how many times I've said those words myself. I know how that feels. And it really made me empathize with him when he said that. And from that point on, I just wanted to keep him safe. I wanted to see him happy. I also love their little hug moment at the end. Juxtaposing this guy who wears his emotions on his sleeve and is super active and expressive next to the quiet, stoic Master Chief was such a good move. I love all their interactions. He was a little annoying to me at first, I'll admit, with all his complaining about having to actually be there in the fight and do shit. And I was like, man, for a Marine, you're kind of a chicken and a bit of a bitch. But then he came out later on and said that he's not actually a soldier. He lied so he could get away. And man, I get that. Fear makes you do crazy shit. I've heard a couple of complaints that a civilian shouldn't know how to fly a Pelican, but the dude's a engineer contractor, it sounds like, and I'm sure given enough time that he could figure out how to operate a Pelican. Like, what we know about UNSC gear, like the Warthog, is that they're not that different from civilian-operated vehicles, so it probably wouldn't take much effort for an engineer to figure out how a Pelican works. Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. To see him more invigorated and hopeful by the end of the game made me really happy. I hope he gets to see his wife and his kid again in the future, although I think he mentioned they were dead. I hope that isn't the case. I really want him to get a win. I really do. Now for the last member of our trio, the Weapon. Can I just say real quick how good of a voice actress Jen Taylor is? Her portrayals of Halsey, Cortana, and the Weapon are all distinct, yet you can tell they all come from the same roots. It's damn good performing. I love how the Weapon is essentially a naive, inexperienced version of Cortana. It makes her dynamic with the Chief fresh and entertaining, almost like a Pixie and Brutus sort of thing. Some of the better moments in Infinite involve her taking in the world around her and realizing how people work and seeing things that are wondrous to her and realizing that it's different for other people like the Chief, and her trying to get Chief to open up more. Two of the major highlights of the story are when the Chief tries to delete her and she figures it out and is just totally taken aback from why he would do that. And just watching her grapple with the understanding that Chief would try to betray her like that and thinking about where Chief is coming from here, that was really good writing. I liked that a lot. And then the resolution of that scene where she realizes she's a copy of Cortana, accepts her fate, but then the Chief decides to give her a chance, is good stuff. The revelation that she's a Cortana copy is not the most shocking twist. I kind of just figured that was already the case and it was obvious, so it's not really earth-shattering to us, but the more important part is the effect it has on the Weapon. I understand what it's like to know what awful things you could do to people you care about if you make the wrong choices, but then to still have them give you a second chance at trust, just like that moment with Brohammer, it really resonated with my core. However, the end of the game implies that the Weapon names herself Cortana. And I've seen the theories about how she's going to pick some other name. That's not the case, guys. Watch the scene. She's going to name herself Cortana. She literally asked the Chief if it's okay to do that. Why would you want to do that? Apology or not, Cortana butchered billions, if not trillions. Picking the name Cortana would be like if I went around calling myself Hitler. This is a definite misstep, but I guess we're just going to have to deal with it. Regardless of this, I'm excited to see more of this trio back. I'm excited to see what adventures they get up to. I want to talk about Escharum too. Man, this guy would have been so lame with a less talented voice actor, but god damn if Darren DePaul doesn't make him charismatic as fuck. For a guy who spends a lot of the game talking, I actually really enjoyed whenever Escharum was on screen lecturing me about how I'm gonna get my ass kicked. His scenery chewing is entertaining as hell. I also really appreciated getting cutscenes from his side. Despite seeing so little of it, his friendship with Jaga was well done. I wish we'd seen more of it. In fact, I rather wish Escharum had survived this game. I feel like 343 kills their villains too quickly. I think Escharum could have easily been featured in multiple games. I'll accept it, though that's because we needed someone major to defeat by the end of the game, and the Harbinger does not scratch that itch. I feel some empathy for Escharum. He watched his home planet get destroyed. I mean, Doisak's destruction must have really fucked with the guy, so I do feel really bad for him there. Here's something I don't like, though. Right after Escharum dies, Chief says he was just a soldier, hoping he was doing what was right. I didn't see that at any point in the game. That came out of left field for me, and it's definitely an awkward beat with no grounding that kind of ruins the moment. On the topic of voice acting, all of it is absolutely top-notch. Every single boss and side character would have been totally forgettable if not for their stellar voice acting.
Welcome to my tower, Master Chief. It is where you will be broken. Spartan's not so tough, I think. Break open easy. Soft inside.
Have you seen her?
Kinda. Do you want to tell him?
Tell me what?
The monitor is gone.
Gone? Gone? Gone?
Some other little touches that I liked. It's excellent attention to detail that in cutscenes, Chief is holding whatever weapon you were carrying when you trigger that cutscene. And it's more than just a model swap, his hands are correctly positioned and everything. The Cortana whispers are also pretty cool with some nice callbacks, even some to Halo 4. As a massive Halo 4 fan, I really appreciate that 343 hasn't forgotten about their best story. Okay, now we're gonna get into the not good stuff. Gonna start with some relatively smaller complaints, and then I'll get to what I call the 3 big gripes. Starting right at the beginning, this opening is so fucking rushed, it hurts. I can't tell if this was intentional to cause confusion, or something for shock value, or the result of development issues, or all 3, but either way, it's not great. I remember one of the complaints about Halo 5 being that casual fans were confused from the start of the game because it doesn't connect to Halo 4's end, and Infinite does that even worse. I know for a fact most casual fans didn't play Halo Wars 2 or read the books, so the game could have spent some amount of time answering questions at the beginning like, who the fuck are the Banished? What are their motivations? Who the fuck is Atriox? Why are they attacking the UNSC? Where is Blue Team? Where is Osiris? Where are the Guardians? Why is everyone at this ring? In their haste to make a spiritual reboot for Halo, 343 seems to have forgotten that they still need to make a cohesive storyline. Moving forward a bit, the Chief versus Atriox fight is good. I think it's totally plausible that Atriox could wipe the floor with Chief, and it's hard to watch Chief get his ass kicked like this, but I find it hard to believe that 1, Atriox got uppercutted by a Spartan 2 in full Mjolnir and didn't so much as lose a tooth. And number 2, Atriox would not 100% make sure of Chief's death by smashing his head in with Chainbreaker or something. I mean, everyone knows the story of the Master Chief and how he always comes back and saves the day. I mean, I know if Atriox had brutally murdered Chief, like ripped his arms off and shit, I know if he did that we wouldn't have a game, but still, come on. Speaking of which, how the hell did Chief survive in space for 6 months with only the air and fluids he had inside of the suit? Mjolnir is good, but it's not that good. Maybe it's a Gen 3 thing, I don't know. Also, I know people didn't like the Infinity, though I did. And I know it probably needed to be sacrificed for this sort of underdog story, but holy crap did it deserve better than an off-screen death. Plus, ambush or no, not only is it plain disrespectful to have it taken out by banished ships in a claimed 4 minutes, it is also logistically improbable. The Infinity has 4 MAC guns plus a stupid amount of secondary weaponry, all powered by Forerunner engines, I might add, but it also carries an escort of presumably 10 advanced Mulsanne-class frigates with it. You know, the ones that we see in the big team battle maps that are armed with directed energy lasers? There's no way the entire thing went down in 4 minutes. I could see it losing in a very prolonged engagement, one we should have on screen, by the way, but not like this. Big slap in the face to Infinity fans like me to have it swept under the rug like this. I did not appreciate it. To discuss the Banished. I'm rather disappointed with the representation in Infinite. They had such a strong identity in Halo Wars 2, but in Infinite they're basically just the Covenant in red. And for a faction led by the Brutes, there's a lot of Brute stuff missing, like the Spiker, the Mauler, the Prowler, the Brute Shot. And while the Chopper is back, the fact that it doesn't just plow through vehicles anymore is a huge letdown. I like some of their new weapons. The Shock Rifle, the Ravager, the Mangler fit the mark well, but the lack of unique banished weapons and vehicles introduced in Halo Wars 2 is really felt here. Where are the vehicles that everyone associates with the Banished? The Blisterback? The Reaver? The Marauder? The fucking Banished Scarab on the cover of Halo Wars 2? The Banished Ghost and Banished Wraith return, but are far less visually distinct than their Covenant counterparts than they were in Halo Wars 2. I must also admit that I kinda have trouble with their implementation as the primary enemy of Infinite. It's clear to me that they weren't originally meant to be that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been introduced by an RTS game that the majority of the fan base didn't even watch the cinematics for. 343 obviously saw how much people liked them and said, hey, let's make them Halo's main antagonists now, and just shoved them into Infinite with no explanation. Which is really a fumbled execution of this idea and only leads to more confusion among the fan base. I like the Banished, but this was not the proper way to go about bringing them into the main story. Small point now, the Skimmers. They're just dropped in and never explained. They're fine as enemies, but why don't we get any information on them? Are they part of the Banished, or do they exclusively serve the Harbinger? Are they a totally separate race from the Harbinger? Are they related to the Harbinger at all? Just seems strange that they didn't address any of this. Anyone else notice that a lot of cutscenes go like this? Chief walks up to a thing, the weapon comes out, camera pans around the weapon as they talk. It's a lot of cutscenes. Got old after a while. Could have spiced things up a bit. There's very few cutscenes after you acquire the weapon that aren't like this. I get the idea that the scene where you watch Spartan Griffin die is probably supposed to be quite sad, except I have no idea who this guy is. I don't care about him. I don't feel anything for his death. Same goes for the other Spartans we find. I can appreciate Chief's reaction to them, and I can appreciate my controller vibrating slower and slower as Griffin's heart putters out. That was pretty cool. But it would be much more impactful if we watched someone we know die. As much as I want Locke to be alive so he can be improved upon in the future, if he absolutely had to die, putting him here instead of Spartan Griffin would be much better. Hopefully he is still alive and was not killed off-screen like Hyperius' armor seems to suggest. That would be a massive mistake. Now, to address the 3 big gripes. These are much more than just simple gripes. They are large issues that totally hobble the story, but 3 large issues that hobble the story isn't as catchy as 3 big gripes, so yeah. Gripe number 1. A pretty significant portion of the game is dedicated to wrapping up Halo 5's story off-screen. Hey, I'm not a fan of Halo 5's story either, I hate it, but that doesn't mean you basically just write it out of the universe. Just as I predicted, we now have not 1, but 2 completely disconnected stories in the Halo franchise, and it's all a fucking mess. It particularly bothers me as a writer how disjointed the mainline Halo story has become. The opportunity was there to make something good out of the created plotline, but just as they did with Halo 4, they took fan criticism and overcorrected by a huge amount instead of trying to improve the foundation they laid down. It didn't work for Rise of Skywalker, and it doesn't work for Infinite. Now, any potential Halo 5 setup for the future has been brushed aside for a new story, just like the Didact, just like Requiem. What the hell happened to See You on Sanghelios? I'm getting really tired of this. It's really hard to be invested in a story when it keeps course-correcting and leaving its previous plots behind. Speaking of Cortana, I absolutely do not buy her apology scene. You cannot convince me that she goes from literal genocide to, oh, actually, I was wrong, tee-hee, sorry, John, forgive me. Just like that. She sacrifices herself to make things right. Sorry, I admire the attempt, but killing yourself doesn't make up for the billions that Cortana murdered. This moment isn't redeeming. It's not sweet. It totally falls flat. Especially because we've already seen Chief and Cortana say goodbye before in a much better scene, in a much better game. Only time will tell if it was the right decision to devote so much of Infinite's main story to setting aside Halo 5's story. That'll depend on the quality of what future content for Infinite delivers. As I will discuss later though, it's not looking promising, but right now it only weakens what we do have. Gripe number 2. I feel like nothing fucking happens in the story. From the very beginning, you were chasing breadcrumbs, and I went from level to level always thinking I was going to find the answers I sought at the next story beat, but in the end, those breadcrumbs amounted to nothing. All the good stuff, Infinity's destruction, Cortana's second death, all of that happens off screen. I didn't even know that Halo had moved until I looked it up later. You spend the entire game playing catch-up. That works for certain games. I thought Fallout 76 did it very well, but in the first mainline installment in the Halo universe in 6 years, it doesn't work. Every single time someone talked about how this Halo ring is different, I expected them to say fucking why, but they never do. And eventually we find out why the ring is blown up, what happened to Cortana and Atriox, and it's all just underwhelming. Any interesting shit we do see, like Doisak's destruction, is done so in holograms. In fact, there's a whole lot of plot points shown to us in holograms. I feel like this is due to the rumored restructuring the campaign had once Joe Staten came on board. It's not impressive. As for what you actually do during the campaign, you spend a lot of time saving Marines that, as I mentioned, have no effect on the story. You try to stop the Reformation, which, hey, I see you guys watched Brotherhood War 343. Yeah, Reformation, I pick up on that. JK. But the Reformation, which is supposed to be the ring putting itself back together and actually has no effect on the environment whatsoever, it might as well not even be there. You kill Escharum and a bunch of his lieutenants, which has no effect on the Banished whatsoever, and you chase down the Harbinger, who does nothing but set up the next story. Which is the third gripe. Gripe number 3! Another significant portion of the game was allocated to setting up future stories, in particular everything revolving around the Harbinger. I don't like it when stories do this, unless it's done well, and it isn't really done well here namely because of what Infinite is promising to set up, which is, and I quote, something worse than the Flood. Yeah, you heard me, something worse than the Flood. Oh god, this is gonna be stupid as hell, isn't it? Let's go over why it's gonna be stupid as hell. The entire concept, the groundwork for Halo as a franchise, is because someone built these big space hula hoops that kill everything in the galaxy because it's the only way to stop the Flood. The Forerunner trilogy also goes into detail about just how bad the Flood was at its height, and man, was it bad. Bad as in they could convert entire planets into key mines, outcompete the Forerunner's intelligence out of sheer computational power, get AIs to join their side just by talking with them, control staggeringly massive precursor constructs like star roads, use superluminal transit, and even their mere presence could negatively affect space-time itself. Guys, it does not get worse than this. Well, actually it does, because the Flood is descended from the Precursors, which are basically transcendent gods. If the Precursors were to come back with a vengeance, that could be worse than the Flood, but it sure looks like the Endless are not Precursors. At least that's what they seem to be setting up, Hidden Xperia's theory videos aside. Which means the Endless are going to be some random new alien race shoehorned in where it effectively breaks Halo's lore at the foundation. Because if there's something worse than the Flood that isn't the Precursors, the entire lore is trivialized to near meaninglessness. Power creep like this, purely for the sake of sensationalism, ruins stories. I don't have a whole lot of hope for the Endless. I think it's going to be a travesty, so I'm not enthused that a whole lot of Infinite was spent hyping them up, because I'm not hyped. Talk about the Harbinger. She's got great voice acting and a cool design, but she is otherwise pretty much worthless. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't have an arc or characteristics that set her apart from your bog-standard villain. Her whole role in the plot is to make threatening statements she doesn't deliver on, to rant about her race is coming back, and to start the return to the Endless so the next campaign can happen. She's the Didact, if everything good about the Didact wasn't there. When I saw she was the final boss, I thought, we barely know anything about her, and she hasn't really added anything to the story. She won't die here. Chief is gonna get defeated, and the Harbinger will escape. That'll be a ballsy ending. I like it. You know, kind of like Halo 4's was supposed to be before they killed the Didact off in a comic. And then the Harbinger's boss fight was super easy, and she died, and I said, oh. What a waste of a cool-looking character with a great actress. So freaking pointless. So, all in all, Infinite's story has 4 really strong characters and is totally hamstrung by a large amount of other issues. It's a step in the right direction after Halo 5, but that's not saying much, and it certainly doesn't reach the heights of Halo's best stories. In conclusion, Halo Infinite was fun to play, but it needed to be more than just fun. Infinite needed to start off on a really strong right foot, but it's lamely limping forward instead. While there are positive steps taken to bring Halo back to the level of storytelling and gameplay it used to have, Infinite's many, many issues brought on by a difficult production, design compromises, and conflicting goals resulted in a mediocre product. I was unsatisfied. I give Infinite a 6 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed my review. Do you agree or disagree with my points? Did I leave anything out that you thought I should talk about? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.